Good morning. I'm glad you're all staying warm. I'm sorry, I'm having a slight computer issue, but I think I'll be okay. I hope at least. I just want to welcome all of you. Give me 1 second. I'm going to move my computer here, and I think that'll solve the problem. Okay, I think that seems to be working actually. I'm glad you're all staying warm, and I'm very glad that you decided to come learn a little Torah this morning. Why don't we begin with our blessing? I'll go ahead and share my screen. Can you see that okay?
No.
Nope.
No, huh?
Well,
Not
what
at
we're
all.
seeing is Rabbi Jeff Dreifus has started screen sharing with the little thing going around.
Okay, 1 second. All right, let's try that again.
Yeah.
How about now?
Nope.
No. What in the world? Okay. We'll have to try something else.
There you are.
You see me, but not my screen, huh?
Oh,
Now you see it?
that's a blank screen.
Yeah,
It's,
just a blank page.
it's an existential exercise. To say what you think you believe from that screen.
It can be whatever you want. See?
Yeah.
How about now?
There you go.
Now it
says
says,
Torah
Yeah.
study.
Wonderful.
The left, Torah study on the right.
Yep.
Now we got it. Okay, for some reason it wouldn't let me show the slideshow, but I'll make it as big as possible.
Oh,
Okay, well, let's get started.
blue.
Baruch atah Adonai, Heinu melech
Eloheinu melech
haolam,
haolam,
asher
asher
itzanu
mitzvotav v'tzivanu
v'tzivanu
la'asot b'divrei Torah.
Torah.
Amen. 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 See if we can make this a little bit bigger for you.
Great. Super.
Super. Good enough. Is it good enough? Can you see it okay?
Yes, I can read it.
Lovely. Lovely. Okay. I'm just gonna ask y'all to mute unless you're speaking, just so we don't get a bunch of feedback. But I want this to be very participatory, so you can unmute in just a minute. But today, this is actually one of the best, I think, unquestionably, but certainly in my opinion, parshiot in the entire Torah. It is the one immediately preceding my bar mitzvah portion. Bishalach is next week, and I like that one too. But this one is quite exciting. We get the final 3 plagues. We get the Passover story, the matzah, the paschal lamb, the blood on the doorpost, the beginning of the Exodus story. Next week we get the sea splitting on both sides, the Israelites walking through on dry land. But today I want to talk about probably primarily, if not only, the plague of darkness. One of the most, I would say, the most mysterious plague of all 10. And that is because, we'll read this in a minute. I'm assuming you're all, if you've ever been to a Passover Seder, you're somewhat familiar with the plague of darkness. But why here? Why the 9th plague? Before we read about the plague itself, I'd like to read this from Rabbi Sachs. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, the former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom. Would somebody please read?
I'll read.
Thanks, Wendy.
The ninth plague, darkness, comes shrouded in a darkness of its own. What is this plague doing here? It seems out of sequence. So far, there have been 8 plagues, and they've become steadily and increasingly more serious. The first 2, blood and frogs, seemed more like signs than anything else. The third and fourth, gnats and wild beasts, caused worry, not crisis. The fifth, the plague that killed livestock, affected animals, not human beings. And the sixth, boils, was again a discomfort, but more serious this time. And the seventh and eighth, hail and locusts, destroyed the Egyptian grain. Together with the previous loss of livestock, now there was no food. Still to come was the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn, that would eventually break Pharaoh. So we would expect the 9th plague to be very serious indeed. Instead, it seems to be an anticlimax. Darkness is a nuisance, but no more.
Thank you very much, Wendy. So I'd like to, before we read about this specific darkness, this specific plague in our parasha, I want to ask you to just think to yourself for 30 seconds or a minute about times when you have been in darkness. Now, this could be physical darkness, could be the power goes out. Oh God, where's the flashlight? What did that feel like? It could be spiritual or mental darkness. Just take a moment and think about what that darkness felt like. Okay. Well, we'll come back to that in a minute. But first, let's read about this darkness, which happened a few thousand years ago, according to the Torah. The plague of darkness. This is Exodus 10. Would somebody like to read the English?
And the Lord said unto Moses, stretch out your hand toward heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, even darkness which may be felt. And Moses stretched forth his hand toward heaven, and there was a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. They saw not one another, neither rose any from his place for 3 days. But all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings.
Thank you very much, Russell. So what do we notice? We've each experienced darkness in our own lives. In the iPhone era, it's hard to be completely dark, but I'm sure we all have that experience. But what's unique, or maybe not unique, but what is particular about this darkness?
Well, Rabbi,
Go ahead, Wendy.
what I understand about this particular darkness is that you couldn't even see your hand in front of your face. You couldn't see anything. You'd open your eyes, but you couldn't see anything.
I got the impression it was palpable, almost like smoke.
It says it can be felt.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, palpable.
But the darkness is very frightening, and we affirm that on Shabbat when we read the prayer about night coming and to protect us in the darkness of night.
Thank you, Dr. Don. Very nice.
And the thing is that the Jews could see. The darkness was only for the Egyptians.
Very important distinction, very important observation, that the Egyptians were plagued by this, but the Israelites Haya or the Moshavatam. They had light in their dwellings. Eileen, go ahead, and then Team Weingarten, and then Lynn.
That's what I was just going to comment on. All the children of Israel had light in their dwellings
So this afflicted, just like,
inside.
yes, very nice, very nice. They had light. They were not afflicted by this plague.
Huh.
Yeah.
Team Weingarten, go ahead.
Why? Why?
Why? Why? Okay.
Hey, good morning,
I think
Rabbi.
we'll actually come back to why in just a minute. But if we don't, Eileen, in about 4 slides, please raise that question again. But I think we'll talk about it. Team Weingarten, go ahead.
Hey, good morning, Rabbi. Good morning, all. I suspect that not only is this referring to a physical darkness, but also a darkness of the spirit. The 8 preceding plagues were pretty bad. So, we're talking about a world where, it's not only a depressive darkness, you can't physically see, but also it's a darkness of the spirit. And also Michelle says that it's because there's a great foreboding to come as well.
It's as if you read ahead. It's as if you read on. But yes, exactly. It's preceding the most terrible plague possible, the death of the firstborn. And so perhaps there's a sense of foreboding here. Very nice. I think we said Lynn, and then we got so many hands raised. This is great. We'll do Lynn and then Terry, and then we'll go from there.
When Moses stretched forth his hand and there was a thick darkness, he killed their God, Ra, the sun, the light. That was their God. Moses killed their God. That's pretty deep stuff.
That is such an important point. What a wonderful point. Their most powerful God, their most central God was the sun God. And it was in a way of saying, but we have this back and forth the entire time with the plagues. Oh, your God can do that. Well, look at our magicians can do. We can turn our rods into snakes too. We have powers just like you do. But if the Jewish God, or the Israelite God at this point, Yud He Vav He, or Adonai, can totally overpower your God, then that's a really serious sign. That's such a great point, Lynn. Thank you. Terry, go ahead.
I was going to, ripping a little bit off of Lynn too. And for 3 days, they wondered what had happened to their God. Can you imagine how terrifying that would be? We've never have, when we are in dark places and we wonder what happened to our God, but think about this, for 3 days, they were wondering what happened to our God. But the point I was going to make, if you've ever been to Mammoth Cave and done a Mammoth Cave tour, there is a point when you get down deep enough where there's no ambient light at all. And they make you turn off everything, and then they turn off all the lights. That is some of the most, and you're safe. You're with people who know what they're doing. And it is absolutely terrifying because you really cannot see anything. You're afraid to move one way or the other. And I always think about that experience when we get to this, because that must have been what it was like for them, that terrified to move from, well, they'd already had all these other things. Can you imagine? I'd be terrified to step on another frog. Just all these other things that had happened to them. This just, of all of the things that have happened to them so far, to me, this is the most terrifying.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you, Terry.
But what I noticed, Rabbi, line 23 there, they saw not one another, neither rose any from his place for 3 days. So they sat frozen in the spot that they were in when the lights went out. And I'm really curious as to whether or not they could hear each other. You would think they would call out, where are you? And kind of get their bearings that way. So that I'm curious about those two facts.
We'll come back to this idea about their interaction, the Egyptians' interaction with one another. That's an important piece.
Rabbi?
Hey, Susan.
I am in partial blindness a lot of the time, and it is very scary. And it's not the spiritual kind, it's physical, and it is scary.
Thank you for sharing that, Susan.
Welcome.
And I suspect that having Richard or other people who can help you is what makes it not only, or keeps it from being a spiritual fear and makes it just a physical fear. I'm sure there's both at times, but the interaction of the Egyptians with one another, or the lack of interaction with the Egyptians with one another, perhaps they were totally, the Midrash talks about this, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but perhaps they felt totally alone.
Rabbi,
Go ahead.
when you asked earlier how I felt in moments of darkness, I feel separation. I feel like I'm the only one there because you don't see any of the physical signs of other human beings being there. You don't see the street lights outside. You don't see whatever. So I felt that physical separation. I think this darkness was almost necessary as the ninth plague, because you couldn't have these people getting together and saying, oh, let's try to think what we can do about this, because there wasn't anything they could do about it.
So let's take Dr. Levy and Dr. Don, and then let's move on, because I want to hear what some of our medieval commentators say about this.
Yeah.
As a medieval commentator, I would say, why wasn't that the only plague? Nobody's hurt. The animals live. Everybody's happy. We're going there.
We had a little trouble hearing you.
Why wasn't that the only plague? Nobody's hurt. The animals are safe. We leave. They stay.
Interesting question. Why all the other plagues were destructive, both to human and animal life, to the ecology? Why, if God could make the point without all of that, why not?
I think it's what Lynn said, that who said, let there be light? Our God, not theirs. That's the only point I think that God could possibly be making, because otherwise he wouldn't need all the other plagues. Their God did not create light, ours did.
It's really interesting point. Oh, I see there's a lot in the chat. The only thing I want to say is many medieval commentators, I think Rashi in particular, but many say that we often think about the plagues as being a way of scaring the Egyptians, and especially Pharaoh, into letting us go. But what Rashi says is, in fact, the plagues were to scare the Israelites, were to make the Israelites afraid enough of God that they would be obedient and listen to God once they were free. If they could see what God could do to the Egyptians, that would scare them into submission, in a sense. And so perhaps that also played a role in the multitude of plagues. But it's such an interesting take, Dr. Levy. Thank you. Don Strauss, and then let's go back a few centuries.
Yes, my question is, could the Egyptians see that the Israelites had light and they didn't?
Very interesting question. It's obviously, it's not, this is all we have, by the way, in the Torah. So in the Midrash, which is a rabbinic expansion, or kind of what I've heard as rabbinic fan fiction on the Torah, there are different ideas about what happens. One in particular, which maybe doesn't paint our ancestors in the best light, no pun intended, is that the Israelites could see, in fact, and went into the homes of the Egyptians and plundered them for gold and silver. Now the rabbis, what's the term? They say this is okay because it's really back payment. It's back taxes or back wages for all the time in the 400 years in slavery that the Israelites were never paid. But you would think, although it's unclear, if the Israelites were in their, actually maybe not, if the Israelites were in their homes, the Egyptians, if they could hear, would have known about it. But I think it's ambiguous if the Egyptians could tell that the Israelites could see. Good question. So let's move on just a little bit. Try to. Okay. So what's the nature of this darkness? We've been talking about what we get from the text a little bit, but let's move on a little bit to some medieval commentators. I'm just reading through the chat because we have so many great comments. And I know we have a few new folks here. Welcome. Glad that you're here with us. Rabbi Salem, David Bierman, Randall, Bryson. Good to see y'all this morning. Adam David. I know y'all are here from time to time, but it's nice to see you. Kay says, psychologically, darkness is the worst abuse. And psychological issues can be their own darkness, says Randall.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Yeah, this thought has been in my mind all the time after I saw Rashi's answer commentary here about how it was palpable and how it kept them literally in place. And I actually think there is something very destructive about it because people cannot live without stimuli. Keep stimuli away from them and it destroys them psychologically. It's part of torture in wartime.
And it's why, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, isolate them, make sure that they either have too much stimuli or not enough. Total darkness, that's bad.
It's definitely bad, and that's why much of the world considers solitary confinement to be torture.
Yes.
Go ahead, Carolyn. Oh, Carolyn, you're on mute.
This one, is that okay?
Perfect. Oh, no, now you're muted again.
Okay, this one comes down from above. Don't most of the other plagues come sort of up, frogs out of the so this one he brings down from above, which would be even more amazing.
Interesting. I had never thought about that. Really interesting. And then the angel of death, of course, comes from, well, I don't know. I actually don't. We do have the word yarad to go down quite a bit in this parasha. I can see if in a minute if I'll look at the text and see if I can find how many times, but quite a bit that God came down or the darkness came down. I don't know what the verb is for the angel of death, but I think you're right to say this is probably the first plague that came from on high, as opposed to either like the wind that God sent to clear the locust. Maybe it was sideways. It was I think an east wind, but very interesting perspective. That because how much more intimidating would that be for human beings? Which typically don't look up, right? When we're walking through the woods, we're looking for predators from behind us, or from underneath us or parallel to us, same level of us, but we typically don't look at predators from above. So interesting point. The only thing I want to say before the Rambam is Rabbi Salem. I don't know if you remember, I think we were in Israel together and we did a couple Truah trips in Jerusalem and the West Bank together. So glad you're here. Okay.
You.
Good to see you. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to think about this darkness in a few different ways. Literal darkness, spiritual darkness, mental darkness. But first let's explore this notion of literal or physical darkness. So the Ramban, Nachmanides, he picks up on this phrase, lo kamu ish mitachtav, that the person didn't rise from his place. Actually, I didn't bring the whole Hebrew. It says, they saw not one another. Lo ra'u ish et achiv. They didn't see one another, and they didn't rise from their place. So what does the Ramban say about this? He says, why could the Egyptians not move just because it was dark? He describes this darkness, and some of you have said this, as something thick, intangible. So could somebody read what the Ramban answers to this question? I'll read it. This darkness was not just that there was no sunlight. It was more than a nighttime darkness. It was thick darkness, meaning that a very thick mist came down from the sky. This is why God said to Moses, stretch forth your hand to the heavens. Moses had to bring down this darkness. Exactly what you just said. Carolyn, very nice. Sforno takes this a step further. Could somebody read what he says?
This will remove the normal darkness called night. The reason this was necessary was that the night consists of air ready and capable to absorb light in the morning. Excuse me. The darkness that would occur now was something unable to interact with light at all. The reason for this inability to interact with light was the density of the texture of this darkness. As a result of this totally different kind of darkness, even a lit up flare would not be able to make a dent in the darkness.
It kind of sounds like something out of Harry Potter, doesn't it? The medieval, I think this is an insight into the mindset or the philosophy of the medieval rabbis to explain to give kind of I wouldn't say scientific, but to give a interpretation of the text that makes the either the supernatural or the hard to believe to explain it. But what I think is I've heard from all of you today is that the physical darkness is only a small part of why darkness is so terrible or so terrifying. In fact, there's other kinds of darkness that are much worse. Dr. Levy, did I see you about to say something?
I'm just wondering, we know God is the creator of light. Is now God the creator of darkness too? In other words, the darkness is not just the absence of light. It's not a passive situation. It's an active, I create everything. I even create darkness. Before there was light, there had to have been darkness. Tohu and Bohu, whatever that is. There had to have been darkness, and God must have created that too. Create Hakol, create everything.
It's such an interesting point, right? Because before there was darkness, that was the first thing God created. Vayehi or, God said, let there be light. Vayehi or, and there was light. So before the light, what was there? What was there darkness? Was it nothingness? It's a great question. Did this plague bring? Is it kind of an anti-creation?
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Russell. Go ahead.
Yes, metaphorically, we often speak as ignorance is a type of darkness. following up on that, you wonder if the Egyptians actually didn't help God to bring this on through their ignorance.
Through in what sense their ignorance of why to enslave, why enslave people? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think they were. I think most of them were either unaware of what had been going on or what was causing these other plagues, or else they were so separated from Pharaoh they didn't have any knowledge of what was happening. I don't think the Egyptian people were. I think they were pawns, so to speak. I don't think they had any sensible knowledge of what was happening.
They were unable to perceive the light of the one true God. There you go.
Right.
Interesting. So perhaps this was a very fitting punishment because in past they hadn't been able to see the light of our God, the one true God, as you said, Tom. This is that's what they get. That's what they deserve. Okay, Nancy, go ahead.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm going kind of in a different direction. First of all, the word texture just it spoke to me because it's a different sense. It's the sense of touch. And I was thinking of the darkness as the absence of. So I was thinking in terms of senses, like it's kind of Kabbalistic, the absence of smell, the absence of sound. Like when I'm meditating, I'm not smelling anything. I'm not hearing anything. I'm not smelling anything. I'm not smelling matzo ball soup or anything like that. It's kind of the absence of something. If I have a void, I'm trying to fill it with something, and darkness is, well, for me, I'm trying to fill it with light, or even deeper, I'm trying to fill it with God. But yeah, that the absence of and the word texture just kind of gets to me, I think.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm thinking of like a hyperbaric chamber, and how disorienting that can be. Kay said in the chat a minute ago, people may have wondered if they were dead. Like, I'd never thought about that. How terrifying must it have been? Is this death? Is this what it means to die? And yet you still have your consciousness on some level, but you can't move and everything. I mean, that is such a insightful point. How terrifying it must have been. Let's move on to from a physical darkness to an internal darkness. And I think, Eileen, in just a minute, we will have some insight into the why, perhaps. Okay. Would somebody like to read?
I'll read. After having committed the first sin, Adam saw his first sunset, and it filled him with dread. The Midrash teaches that after having committed the first sin, Adam saw his first sunset on the eve of Shabbat. He was alarmed, afraid that the world was blacking out. That the world was blacking out, running down, and that he had caused it to happen. The cosmic darkness, he thought, not only reflected his own inner darkness, but perhaps resulted from it. At sunrise, Adam realized it was the way of the world and that he would have to cope with it and confront the darkness. After Shabbat, God gave Adam 2 flints, which Adam struck together and created fire, blessing God. Blessed are you who creates the lights of fire.
So what is this saying? What is this idea saying? And it's similar to what I think Russell said a moment ago, at least in my reading of it.
You know, one of the interesting things to me is in the first chapter of Genesis, it describes all those days as being evening, then morning. So God created light, and then everything went dark because it was evening. And that's always been a little puzzle to me.
Oh.
Yep.
Well, here in this midrash, it's imagining that Adam never experienced a sunset, that the day part never ended for Adam until he ate of the fruit. The first 7 day part is Genesis 1, and then Adam starts Genesis 2. And we don't have in Genesis 2 the same Vayera Vayivoker Yom Shishi, right? We don't have in there was night and there was day, Yom. So I think the rabbis are playing with that idea that while Adam was in this Garden of Eden period, it was all light. At least that's what they're imagining here, is all day. And yet when he first sees the sun setting, you can imagine how terrifying that is. And he's viewing that as a result of his actions. And I want to take Terry and then Carolyn and then Eileen, and then I want to perhaps move on to another idea, not just internal darkness, but interpersonal darkness. Terry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't know how many of you are friends with Lynn Turner on Facebook. If you're not, you should be, because every night he posts a beautiful picture of a Memphis sunset. And this would be a beautiful teaching to go along with Lynn's pictures. That's all I was going to say.
Thanks, Terry.
It puts it in a different perspective.
So we know sunsets to be beautiful. If all you had ever known was daytime, and then all of a sudden the sun looked like it was going away. I mean, has anybody
or the sky turned that beautiful colors that we're seeing, it wouldn't be beautiful to you, would it?
It could be terrifying. And I love the I think a psychologist or psychiatrist, I guess psychologist would call this like attribution bias. Like we think that that our actions are the cause of external things, even when they may not be. And so when you feel guilty about something, and then something happens externally, I'm wondering if anybody's ever had this experience. You're like, oh God, is that because of what I did? Can anybody think of an example of that? I need another cup of coffee before I can. Go ahead, Tom.
I can share a brief anecdote. Maybe last century, I was working in Sacramento on a high rise up on the 7th floor with our offices up there. And the restrooms right in the center of the building where the elevator shafts also run. And I was in there using the toilet, and one of my coworkers came in and did what he had to do and walked out. And on his way out the door, he turned off the lights. And he laughed. And he said, Tom, how does a blind man know when he's done wiping his tuchus?
I'm just going to leave that. but that's quite a story. Rabbi Salem, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, sports fans might be able to understand, like, you wear a different jersey on the day and your team loses, and you're like, oh man, I should have worn the red jersey and not the blue jersey, or I moved my position on the couch before the inning ended and there was a strikeout. So that's sort of a lighthearted example.
Such a great point. Such a great example. Or that's why, baseball players are so superstitious. Or if you watch an NBA player before they shoot free throws, they have the same routine. Or a baseball player might take 3 practice swings, but not 4. So very good point. Carolyn and then Dr. Levy. and then Adam, and then let's move on to not just internal darkness, but interpersonal darkness.
I like that God did not give Adam fire until Adam realized that he would have to cope with it and confront it.
Say more about that.
Okay. Adam had to, it wasn't just, okay, you have a problem here, I'll take care of it. You know, he, at this point, Adam had free will, and he had to think about, okay, what could I do about this? Not much, but you know, it's going to be, so I got to deal with it. And at that point, then God helps.
So very nice close reading of the text, Carolyn. So Adam realized he'd have to deal with it and confront the darkness, and then God gave him the tools to do so. So there's power in him resolving to cope with it that then God helps with. Very nice. Dr. Levy.
Isn't it interesting that God requires help? Moses had to bring the darkness down. Aaron has his rod to do this. But it's interesting also that Adam was only alive 3-4 hours. Never knew darkness. And this is, so I got 3 hours of light and that's it. The other people, they were used to light and they were used to darkness. So there is certainly a similarity. And did Eve warn Adam? Look at that ball in the sky, it's moving. He says, leave me alone. If something's going to happen, no, you don't know what you're talking about. Then it's dark because I told you so. Here, they had no, it was an extraordinary moment of the idea that something you're used to, you lose. Adam and Eve weren't used to anything. They figured, okay, I got 3 hours.
So the idea for the Egyptians, this must have been so much worse in a sense, because they lived their whole life knowing there's a cycle of light and dark, and then all of a sudden for 3 whole days, darkness.
And Moses helped bring the cloud down. Adam brings the fire up.
So that's a point we could talk about for hours, I think. Does God need our help in the world to make God manifest or to do God's will? It is interesting. I just want to say it's interesting that when we think about these plagues and then the splitting of the sea are the most supernatural, the most wondrous, and of the greatest magnitude of all of God's works, at least since the creation of the world that we read about in the Torah. And so we think inherent in that or necessary to God's ability to do that is this idea God is so powerful, the most powerful. And yet even on these wonders that are so extreme, God needs human help in order to make it happen. Even the splitting of the sea, it says, you know, Moses put his staff, but the Midrash says that the sea doesn't split until Nachshon ben Aminadab walks in up to his neck, and then it splits. So that's such a wonderful point you make, Dr. Levy. Thank you. Thank you. Who was next?
I vaguely was, but
yeah, Adam, go ahead.
Well, I just because the conversation kept going. Is it the matter of God needing or wanting to see the faith, for lack of a better word coming to mind? Like, if you do this, I'll do that. If you go, let me see that you're faithful enough to go up to your neck, then I'll split the sea. I'm not going to do it before you display your faith in me. Same with telling Moses, look, I can do it. I just want to know that you're depending on me to do it, sort of thing, rather than just like, I can't do it without you doing it. The question, so I guess that's my question. Is it a matter of saying, I can't do it without you doing this first? Or if you do this first, if you raise your hand, then I'll cut out the lights.
Yeah, that's a great question.
If you tell me you love me, I'll buy you ice cream, sort of thing.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah, exactly. That God wants to know that we're in it with God. that God's not alone in this, and God wants us to display our commitment. I'm reminded of, I think you bring up a great point with Nachshon, right? God could have split the sea, but God wanted to see that the Israelites had such faith that God would, they'd go up to their neck in it. I'm thinking of when in a few chapters, the Israelites are at war and Moses has both of his hands up so that God is helping, and Moses's hands are faltering. He's getting tired, and Joshua helps him keep his hands up. And it's only by Moses keeping his hands up that the Israelites are winning. But of course, it's not Moses's hands that are making the Israelites win. It's God. But Moses has to show God, hey, I'm in this, in order for God to continue to help them win. So
And
it's
also Abraham and sacrificing his son, like, hey, do this for me, prove it. And then it's like, you don't have to actually do it. I just wanted to see whether you would, sort of thing.
That's
So
a really good point.
do this for me. It's like, if Moses hadn't raised his hand, would God have caused 3 days of darkness?
Very nice. And I wonder, in our own time, in our own day, and this is a bit of a tangent, but maybe someone is caffeinated enough to bring it back. In our own time, does God need our help to make God manifest in the world? Does God need us to be God's partner, or does God do it alone? Maybe that's food for thought.
The story, God, fellow says to God, why don't you do something? The God says, I did. I made you.
Very nice.
And for
Very nice.
additional reading, Tom would suggest Letters to the Earth by Mark Twain. There's some really irreverent and blasphemous stuff in there.
Can I share a little something?
Please, Terry. And then let's take the Strauss brothers. And then this is what finally gets to Eileen's point from 40 minutes ago about why the Egyptians got this darkness. Go ahead, Russell. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Terry, and then Russell.
Well, okay. You're talking about where does God show up? And this is my youngest son's house burned yesterday, and they lost everything. But in the midst of his trauma, when he was talking to me last night, he said, God showed up today in powerful ways. And I said, really? And he said, yes. And his face looks like my neighbor's. So God does use us in very powerful ways.
So sorry that happened to your son, Terry.
Oh, well, thank you. But yes, it's a traumatic thing. But the fact that he could see that the helpers, as Mr. Rogers calls them, could see the face of God in those people really is encouraging.
Quite an insight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And if our community, it is quite an insight, and thank you for sharing. And if our community, I know he's not here, but if we can do anything to help, let us know.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That wasn't the point, but thank you. I appreciate it.
Of course. Russell and then Don, and then let's move to the Kitav Sofer. Go ahead.
In some cases, we create our own sense of darkness. Adam's darkness was never as dark as the darkness we're describing with the plague. And yet, since he hadn't witnessed darkness before, he felt it very keenly. Yet all the time while he was feeling keenly this darkness, all those stars were up there and the moon, and this was not the same darkness that we're talking about with the plague. So a lot of times we help create that darkness, sadly.
In our own minds.
In our own minds, yes.
Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, to speak to your point about God's being in partnership, I have two thoughts on. One is, if we're not in partnership with God, what is our purpose? And secondly, there's an illustration of that, I think, in this parsha, because God did not go to Pharaoh. he sent Moses and Aaron to Pharaoh. So wasn't that in some form a partnership between Moses and Aaron and God?
Definitely. Definitely. Very nice. I'm trying to think of in Genesis when somebody might remember when Abraham, you have these two episodes called the sister wives episodes, when Abraham and then Isaac both tell various kings that their wives are actually their sisters so they don't get murdered. And then the king ends up finding out. I'm pretty sure God tells the king directly that, hey, this is actually Abraham's wife. Sarah's Abraham's wife. It's not his sister. So don't be having relations with her, because this is actually Abraham's wife or Isaac's wife. And I'm pretty sure we could go back and look that God tells them directly.
He does.
At least Abraham, yes. I think one is a dream and one is directly.
Thank you, Terry. So God does have the option of just talking to Pharaoh, but God doesn't. God goes through Moses. Great point, Dr. Don. So for the last part of our class, the last few minutes, one final interpretation of this kind of darkness that we see in the ninth plague. What was so dark about it? And these commentators say it was actually a darkness either related to or because of their interpersonal relations. The Ketav Sofer says, when a man does not see others or does not want to see them, there's darkness in the world. When a man does not see others or want to see them, there is darkness in the world. So I think what he's saying is, in fact, it was because of their behavior. When they didn't want to see other people, when they didn't want to see the humanity in other people, that brought darkness into the world. Yeah. But this Hasidic Rebbe, Reb Hanoch of Alexander, he takes it even further, makes it even more specific. Does somebody want to read this?
When a man wait a second. The star starts where Reb Hanoch.
Yeah, right here. So he's commenting on Lo ra'u ish et achiv, that a person didn't see his brother.
Did not see his brother.
Yeah.
That is to say, each individual only worried about himself and only looked to save himself and the members of his household, and thus did not rise from under the darkness for 3 days. Not a single one of them succeeded in rising above the degraded spiritual level they were caught in. The Egyptians were responsible for their own darkness because of their selfishness and self-centeredness. It was not the symptom of darkness, it was the cause. Their darkness was spiritual.
Thank you. So here he's giving a rationale for why darkness is the plague. And I think this is an answer, Eileen. I did say we'd get here, and we did, to why the Egyptians were punished in this way. It's a fitting punishment. You know, I'm not sure I should share this, but when I was at Jacob's camp many years ago, and I was a kid, I was playing ping pong, and I was sure that my friend, my lifelong friend who I've known since I was a baby, I was sure that she cursed me in some way when I was playing ping pong against this other person, and I slapped her. I can't remember where I slapped her, but I slapped her, and it wasn't nice. It wasn't kind. And this was back in the day when counselors were allowed to do creative punishments, which they're no longer, probably for the best, allowed to do. And he had me slap a tree in the middle of free time, in a very central part of camp where everybody could see me slapping this tree for the rest of our free time. And it was a fitting punishment. I slapped this person, which I shouldn't have done. And Jamie Brewer, if you're watching out there, I'm sorry that I slapped you. And my punishment was befitting the crime. What this Hasidic Rebbe is saying is the exact same thing. This punishment of darkness is because of their own inner darkness, how they treated other people in a dark way. Did anybody, I see a few hands up, anybody who has not yet shared much, if you want to share it, go ahead. And if not, we'll go back to Don and then Wendy and Tom. Adam, go ahead.
This ties right back to I believe it was Terry's son. She saw God, or your son saw God through the neighbors because they were neighborly. This was not neighborly towards one another. If your son's neighbors said, "Sucks for you, we're off to the football game, bye," you'd never trust that person again. You would never feel good around that person again, and you would not feel good about humanity as a whole. And that's what happened to the Egyptians here. They betrayed one another, and that breeds further betrayal. Whereas brotherly love engenders further brotherly love. Fraternal. Well, that's still sexist. But
Neighborly love.
That's right parallel to what you were discussing, fortunately or unfortunately.
Yeah, great point. Great point. And the Egyptians, by the way, throughout rabbinic literature, are referred to as kind of the symbol of immorality or unkindness. And for that, I mean, they enslaved our people according to the Torah. That probably the worst thing you can do to another group of people. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. Don, I'm sorry, Joe, Dr. Levy, you go ahead. Barbara Lapidus, if did you want to share? Okay, that was just a scratch. Go ahead, Dr. Levy.
I want to say that Abraham Joshua Heschel said, if you look at another person and you don't see the face of God, you need to have your eyes examined.
Very nice. Very nice. Dr. Don. And then Wendy and Tom, and we'll close. Bryson. Oh, Team Weingart. Okay, we have a lot of hands raised. It's 10 o'clock. It's maybe 10:01. Those of you who want to drop, please feel free. I don't want to keep you late. Those of you who want to, I'm sorry, it's 11 o'clock. Those of you who want to stick around for a few minutes, everybody with your hand raised, we'll get to you, and then we'll close with Kaddish. Wendy and Tom, go ahead.
I think that this bears directly, Rabbi, on some of the questions we're faced with right today, is how far beyond our immediate family or our community or our state or country does the milk of human kindness extend? How far out do we want to reach to help our neighbors?
You know, there's a lot to say about this, especially in this next slide, which we're not really going to get to, but there is a difference. The Egyptians had no light, and the Israelites did. They had light. The Egyptians didn't care about this other nation, the Israelites. Should the Israelites extend some form of kindness to the Egyptians? I mean, it's the question of universalism versus particularism in some sense. Do Israelites or Jews, do we have a commitment to people beyond just ourselves? As the Egyptians certainly demonstrated they didn't. But as Jews, do we care about only Israel, or do we care about the entire world? Now, we could talk for hours about, should we care about Israel a little bit more than we care about other nations? Israel being not just the modern state of Israel, but the people Israel, the Jewish people. We could talk about that, and maybe I'll find a text in one of our upcoming parshiot, and we can really focus on that, because that's a conversation I haven't had with our community in a while. So I'd love to do that. I'm going to write that down as Bryson, you're speaking. Go ahead. Oh, you're on mute, Bryson.
Yeah, I think the darkness in this situation was a very fitting plague. because they ignored their own hospitality laws by the way they treated the Israelites. And even though like a midrash later says that a lot of the Israelites didn't go with Moses because they were so acculturated into Egyptian culture, they still treated those people like trash and enslaved them as well. And you know, the whole concept of darkness and being isolated, from my background in like mental health, you know, that the opposite of depression is connectedness and community. And if you're in darkness, you can't connect with anyone, especially this thick darkness that the rabbis almost make sound like a miasma.
Good point. Good point. The Israelites had light because of their community.
Yeah, and it's a good punishment for the Egyptians because at one point they were monotheistic with one pharaoh and they had one god, and that lasted maybe one generation, and they gave that up.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, they didn't like that. Neither did the priests, because then there was only one set of priests instead of all these other gods. It ruined their whole priestly industry.
And yeah, the priests had to eat too. That's
Oh
a good point. Same for our priests. Okay, Joe, and then Team Weingarten, and then Team Weingarten, y'all have the last word.
I have a question for you, please. When we were there during Joseph's time, everything was fine. The saying was, there arose a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph. He couldn't see what was done for them, and neither could the Egyptians. We were fine for years, 200 years, until we got to be slaves. When you say didn't know Joseph, he didn't see the goodness in Joseph, the Jewish people, or anybody. So this happens with leaders, and that's when we get into trouble.
It's a great point, Joe, that the entire book of Exodus, the entire story of enslavement, happened because of xenophobia.
Yeah.
Right? The Egyptians and the Israelites, they were hunky-dory. They were great friends, right? That all of Joseph's descendants were hanging out, or Jacob's descendants were hanging out, living a great life in Goshen. It was like the Germantown or the Cordova or the Collierville of Egypt. They were living large in the suburbs, and then all of a sudden, like you said, arose a Pharaoh shelo yada et Yosef, that didn't know Joseph, didn't know these were good people, and he said, "Oh, they're going to become too numerous, and if we go to war, they'll overtake us." I mean, how do you go from being friends to all of a sudden thinking they're going to overtake you in a war? Not being able to see their humanity. It's a really incisive point. Thank you, Joe. And Team Weingarten, y'all have the last word.
Rabbi, our comment isn't specifically on the concept of darkness. It relates back to a comment earlier in the class about miracles also being an act to sort of scare the Israelites into proper behavior. I don't want to be the guy that derails the conversation here. Is that appropriate?
Well, why not?
Okay. So, I'm thinking about as it relates to, the plagues and everything that's associated with the freedom of the people from the Egyptians. If I'm not mistaken, there is a word that references back to, the wonders and stuff, the word Norah. Does that word not also mean terrible?
It means awe. So awe can be awesome, like amazing, or awful. It can be both very positive or very negative.
Right. And so, when I think about, the plagues and all of these things, it brings to mind, back to that initial comment that, these miracles aren't, rainbow style miracles. These are the kind of miracles that, if we think about a modern analogy, would almost be like the scientists that were there at the Trinity test, where we tested our first atomic weapon, that, these guys witnessed this explosion, and it was awesome, miraculous, and terrible at the same time. And so, and you'll have to forgive my sense of humor, that when, we think about these the Israelites witnessing these spectacular, terrible miracles in a way that I imagine some of them thinking to themselves, oh my gosh, I am glad that Adonai is on our side.
It's a great point, and Tarashi and other commentators, it's the whole reason why the plagues were put forth. If God wanted to, God could have just said, okay, you're free. I'm parting the sea. Go ahead and make your way to Israel. But God chose to give them these signs and wonders. So it certainly didn't take the Israelites very long to forget about it, right? The golden calf is just a few parshiot away.
Right.
But that it's a really good point. For those of you who have not seen Oppenheimer, I actually watched it this past week. You can rent it for $5.99, and it is wonderful. I highly recommend it. I don't know why I went there, but thank you so much for coming today, for learning Torah. And as is clear from our conversation, there's a lot more to be said, even about just this one plague. But that's the joy of studying Torah year after year, is there's always more to learn and talk about. So I know some of you might be here remembering a loved one. And if you are and you'd like to share their name with our community, please do so before we say Kaddish together.
Betty Kaplan Young, my mother. I miss her a lot.
Rebecca Sharon.
Sandra Lazarowitz, my good friend.
Zichronam livracha, may their memories be for a blessing. We join together in our prayer, remembering our loved ones. Mother's Kaddish. Yit gadal, vayit kadash, shemei rabbah. Be'alma divrach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei. B'chayachon uvyomechon. Hayed v'ol Beit Yisrael. Ba'agala uvizman karid v'yemru. Amen. Yehi shemei rabbah mevarach le'olmei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitale v'yitalal shemed kudasha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata. Da'aman be'amat v'yemru. Amen. Yehi shlama rabbi V'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yemru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yemru. Amen. May the one who makes peace in the heavens make peace for us, for Israel, for all the world. And may God please help the most important mitzvah of all, the returning of hostages, speedily in our day.
Amen.
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 Thank you all so much for being here. It was nice studying with you.
Great session. Great session.
I hope y'all stay safe. It's crazy out there.
Day 3 without water.
Rabbi.
Yashta Koach, very good.
It was excellent.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah. I somehow cannot find your faces. It's like I'm shrouded in my own darkness here.
Can you hear our
There
voices?
you are. There you are. I found you. Okay, good.
But would it be inappropriate for everybody left to pray for the Ravens to be victorious in the playoff game today? I think that should take precedent.
If God doesn't
I'm
have anything
sorry.
else to do, then go ahead.
I'm sorry, Don. I'm a Cleveland Browns fan from a long time ago. I'm not praying for those Ravens.
Oh, boo. Boo. I lived in Baltimore for a while, but I'm going to be on Terry's side on this.
Thank you.
I'm a Steelers fan, so we're out.
I'll stay neutral.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Well, good to see y'all. Y'all take care. And we'll see you soon.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Shabbat shalom.
Oh,